Are we live?
We are. And
We're
first
live.
one in the room, I want to say shout out to antiwar.com.
So I was just talking to Angela 10 minutes ago. Yes, Angela Keaton, who is, I don't know, what are you, Angela? You still the editor? Whatever. You're still the leader, the spiritual warrior leader of antiwar.com. Yes, thank you, Michael, for noticing that. I was going to start with which is something that's been like almost an annual ritual for me. Actually, more than annual, for 15 years since I first heard about antiwar.com, way back then, 2010, somewhere around there. Yeah, yes, you are. For sure, the magic behind the scenes. So, antiwar.com has been for several decades now the only, the only place on the internet, in politics, in the real world, anywhere that brings together opponents of American wars, opponents of American empire, who are of the left, the right, the middle, the extremes, doesn't matter. So you have Pat Buchanan and you have Chris Hedges on the same website, both speaking eloquently and forcefully against the idea of an American empire and the idea of all these American wars that we've all lived through our own lifetimes. It is the only place in the world during my lifetime where you can find that, where you can find people of various political persuasions, often antagonistic political persuasions, who are all united around this one cause, which is to repeal, to reduce, to eliminate what we call the American empire, the extension of American military force through 500 to 800 military bases across the world in most countries, the economic dominance of the United States, which is expressed, unfortunately, through a series of trade deals going back 60, 70, 80 years now, all of which have favored the United States, giving it a dominant economic position, which has, of course, buttressed its position as the hegemon, the military and political, therefore, hegemon of the world. So if you want to read everyone from Noam Chomsky to Ron Paul, people of the left and the right, who, as I said, have hostile differences over every other issue, and this is what's so beautiful about it, they all agree that America has no business extending its power, its influence, its reach, its military, its Marine Corps around the world. And we should bring it back home. Bring it all back home. Bring it all back home. Establish the most incredible, impenetrable military defense in the history of humankind. Do that. The anti-imperialist coalition, which is the antiwar.com is the only, as far as I know, continued repository of that movement. The anti-imperialist coalition, which began in 1898, led by Mark Twain and Eugene Debs of the Socialist Party, a movement of the left and the right in American politics who all stood together in 1898 and said, no, we should not go invade Cuba. We should not go invade the Philippines. We should not occupy these countries and attempt to treat and change their children, re-educate their children to think like us. No, we shouldn't do that. And they pulled together a coalition of leftists, socialists, segregationist Southerners. Yeah, there were Southern senators and governors who were arch segregationists and absolute racists who joined in this coalition. Maybe not for the right reasons, but they joined in this coalition to stop the nascent global American empire in its infancy, but they lost. They lost. It was a movement of left and right, extreme left and right, as I just said. Racist, segregationist, Southern politicians and socialists. And Mark Twain. And Andrew Carnegie. And Americans of various walks of life, of all the different classes, of various ethnic groups, and as I said, of radically different political ideologies, all joined together to stop this thing, which since then, since 1898, has resulted in exactly what? What exactly have we gained from it? We've gained 30, 40, 50, 100, depends on how you count. It could be 200 wars, killing and dying. Lindsay O'Rourke, professor of political science and history at Boston College, published a book 3 years ago. Simply, all she did was list the covert operation wars conducted by the CIA since 1949. And she found more than 100. Those are the secret wars. Those are the wars we don't know about. Those are the wars that are not publicized. Those are just the wars conducted by the CIA. So hundreds and hundreds of wars. Ask a country in the world whether they've been invaded, infiltrated by the United States in the last 150 years, and you will find that a solid majority of them, most countries in the world, I bet it's at this point 80 to 90%, have been infiltrated by agents of the United States government, in particular the Central Intelligence Agency, attempting to overthrow, to change the regime of that country. Yes, the vast majority of countries in the world have been targeted with regime change operations conducted in secret by the private army of the President of the United States. This is not an exaggeration. This is not in any way embellishing the facts. We all agree on that. The CIA has been essentially a private army of the president since its founding. And it has conducted at least, certainly way more than 100 covert operations attempting to change the regimes in other countries. Outright, abject, naked imperialism, except it wasn't so naked, it was conducted in secret. And antiwar.com, through my lifetime as an adult, has, as I said, been the only organization, the only media outlet who has consistently, year after year after year after month, regardless of whether it was a groovy Democrat president like Barack Obama or a crusty, nasty Republican president like George Bush, consistently opposed every move forward by the United States empire, consistently opposed every attempt to maintain the existing American empire, the 500 to 1,000 bases, military bases in other countries around the world, and joining together, bringing together people of the left, the far left, and the far right, you could say, and everyone in between around that one cause is an incredible project. And it's the one project, it has been the project that has been my primary focus, my concern for 20-something years, is to bring together the left wing and the right wing to simply bring back, reduce the American empire. It is the one political project that I have been firmly behind my entire political life. And antiwar.com is the only organization, the only media outlet that has been that consistent for that long through my lifetime. So there you go. You're welcome, Angela. Keep doing your work. And everybody go check out that website, because you will find an incredible treasure trove of resources, analysis, news reporting of relevance to this thing we're calling the American empire, which seems to be at the beginning at least, of its end. So there you go.
And yeah, it looks like they have a fundraising drive trying to dollar match a $40,000 donation match committed by an anonymous friend of the website. So now's the time to go. And
it's all, the thing is about antiwar.com is that they are an anti-war organization, and therefore they're always struggling for resources because, so unfortunately, through my lifetime, since the Vietnam War, anti-war organizations and media outlets and public intellectuals and thinkers have been the least popular among all the political organizations and public intellectuals and political thinkers. Well, if you are a political thinker who cares about trans people, you can have a following instantly, quite large. If you are a political thinker who cares about the immigration issue, you'll have significant following. If you care about race, my goodness, political thinker, you will have a huge political following opposing or supporting DEI, either one. You will have a huge political following, at least a potential one. But if you stand up against all the various US interventions militarily in places across the globe, people's eyes glaze over and they lose interest right away. And only the hardest of the hardcore care about this stuff, which unfortunately is the stuff that is the most important stuff, because it is quite literally and exactly about human lives first, and then second, it is about economic destruction. That's what war does. It destroys economies, which of course creates human misery. So human lives, human misery are at stake in this. But certainly in America, hardly anyone really cares. I mean, just the tiny percentage of us, and we all read antiwar.com. But man, I've always wished that Americans would care more about what goes on in the American empire outside our country than they do. But it's just such an uphill battle. The American ignorance and indifference and jingoism when called upon. The average American, like the people I live around in suburban California, America, I'm sure that most of them never think about politics, except when someone comes to them and says, this guy Saddam Hussein, he's got weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and he's going to kill us. What do you think? Should we go to war? And they're like, yeah. Which I'm not. That's completely the full extent of the thought process of most Americans in 2003. We know that. When that changes, and I don't know if it'll ever change, but when that does change, I will live a happier life politically, and I will retire to become a potter and a full-time drummer, and I will live on a beach in Mexico, and I will no longer care about politics. I promise you, when Americans, a majority of Americans, begin to pay attention to US foreign policy and international relations and begin to withdraw the American empire, I will retire from political thinking. And I will be very happy for it. But until then, I'm going to be on watch, because like World War III, nuclear Armageddon, the next World War II, all those threats that have been clearly present, continue to be present. I just, for whatever reason, I feel vigilant about that. And that's my own psychological problem, but I have it and I can't get over it. So Americans, please look at a map, read the histories of these countries, and think about your own interest. Most importantly, like, does this benefit your 4-year-old kid in preschool, getting ready for kindergarten, and you and your real estate investments and your car insurance? And no, of course it doesn't. So pull it back. Let's get on with life. Reduce the American deficit. Bring those soldiers back to this country so that they're no longer in harm's way. Stop killing these people who you don't even know anything about, like the Houthis in Yemen. You don't know anything about them, but we just killed at least 100 of them, probably most of them civilians, without knowing anything about them, right, Americans? You know nothing about them. So that'll be off your conscience too, because apparently a lot of you are Christians, so you care about that. So You know, this is a win-win-win-win-win, not to mention, you know, for the Houthis and the Palestinians and the Iranians and the Iraqis and all those people we've been slaughtering for decades, you know, they'll benefit from it too. But I want you to put that at the end of your list of priorities. I do. Everyone needs to be self-interested when you think about the American empire. We're not going to end it until people do think about it in a self-interested way. Does this benefit you in any way, shape, or form? And there is just only a handful of corporations called defense contractors who do benefit from it, who would say, yes, we need to continue the American empire. Yes, for sure. Absolutely. But if you don't, if you're not one of those, if you're not Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Northrop Grumman, I just want you to really ask yourself, how does it benefit me to send missiles into apartment buildings in Sana'a, Yemen? Because apparently a terrorist, according to Pete Hegseth, was visiting his girlfriend in this apartment building at this time, and they launched Tomahawk missiles from US warships off the coast, of course, ensuring the complete safety of the American war fighters. And they killed, and there's photo evidence of this, there's craters, there's a huge apartment building that's no longer there except for rubble. They killed dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and probably most of them are civilians. So ask yourself, I'm just asking, please, how does that benefit you? Because you know that the worst thing the Houthis are doing, and this is what the administration has said, the worst thing that they've been doing is attacking cargo ships in the Suez Canal region that were headed to Israel. So as you can see from this amazing text chain on Signal among Trump's foreign policy thinkers and decision makers that included Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic Monthly for whatever reason, you can see right there, they are themselves saying in that text chain, oh, this is annoying. J.D. Vance in particular, Joe Kent also in particular. And these are the people we need to pay attention to. There are clearly people inside, deep inside, it's centrally inside Trump's foreign policy team who do not love this idea of bombing people in foreign places for distant reasons. J.D. Vance and Joe Kent were shown to be that in this text exchange. It's one of the great things about this. But again, how does that benefit you? This is so absolutely, completely, ridiculously absurd that this could be of any interest to anybody who lives inside the United States as an American citizen. And I just have to say that, like, sure, there's many things to talk about regarding this, but all you want to do is bring these warships. Why are they in the Middle East? Why are they in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Ocean? How dare those Arabs attack our ships next to their countries? How did the Houthis end up right next to our warships? How did that happen? How did the Houthis in Yemen, halfway across the world, end up right next to our aircraft carriers? What is the nerve of those people to put their country and their bodies next to our aircraft carriers? How could they do such a thing? Obviously, they need to be taken out, especially when they try to stop a genocide. And by the way, Israel, aren't you capable of attacking the Houthis in just this way? You got plenty of missiles. Don't have much of a navy, but you got plenty of aircraft and missiles. Is it that you have to fly over Houthi airspace, over Yemeni airspace, with your planes that we gave you to drop the bombs on the Yemeni children? Is that why you won't do this? Because your poor little pilots might get shot down by the Yemeni resistance? Yes, they are. But, you know, Israel is the most moral and courageous army. So, Americans, don't care. Please don't care, and I mean this, about the morality of Zionism, about the morality of the Gaza war, about the morality of killing 20,000 children in Gaza, and I mean this, care about your own interest first. How does this serve your interest as an American? MAGA, in particular, if you voted for Trump, if you were a Trump supporter, if you identify with MAGA, and especially America First in any way, please think about this. Please think about how Israel supporting it in this way, killing all those children, including a lot of Christians, by the way. How on earth this foreign country, again, halfway across the globe, that Jews never needed for their own safety, and I'm a living testament to that, and so many others are. How on earth can you continue to call yourself MAGA and America First and a Trump supporter and support this ridiculous, genocidal, eternally violent regime? And with that, I hand it over to you, Michael Weimer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say anti-war politics are more popular than you might give credit to the American people for, in that at least when every president, except for the 2020 election, but whenever any president gets brought in, their first election cycle getting brought in, they always run as an anti-war alternative to the establishment before them. Bush was a calmer foreign policy. Barack Hussein Obama was criticizing the Bush wars. Clinton was criticizing the Bush wars before him. Reagan was a smaller government guy who ran with Ron Paul. Yeah.
Keep going. You can keep going. I'll keep it going.
Nixon ended Vietnam. Nixon wanted to end Vietnam. And the American people wanted to.
Nixon, yeah. Mr. Evil, yeah. Nixon, 1968, when he ran for president. That's what he ran on, was to transfer the onus of the war to the Vietnamese to fight it for themselves.
Yeah.
And he did that. He withdrew. It was gradual, but he certainly absolutely withdrew American forces from Vietnam during his presidency, for sure. But your point is so huge, which is that his campaign in 68 was a promise to remove the United States from Vietnam. And then, of course, who was the Democratic standard bearer in 1972? George McGovern, who promised the same thing, anti-war. He wasn't, turns out, anti-war. George McGovern was a huge Cold Warrior, and I'm always arguing with peacenik liberals about this. He was completely a Cold Warrior. But certainly in 72, he was running against the Vietnam War, and in every other campaign. Hubert Humphrey, 68, anti-war. At least, again, ostensibly, right? Yes, exactly, Michael. Right, so that says to us, doesn't it? Politicians care about what more than anything else? Getting elected, because they have to. That tells us, and these guys were studying the American electorate because they're not stupid, studying not just polls, but just various metrics of the vibe among American people for the last 100 years. And you're right, they have found an anti-war sentiment much more often than a pro-war sentiment. And the American people as a group, as a whole, as a mass, have only supported wars when they've been
thrust into them with false flags.
Exactly. Going back to the Maine in Cuba in 1898, the original false flag. Everyone should look at that. The Spanish sunk this American warship in Cuba, the Cuban harbor. We got to go to war with these savages. And we did. And ended up colonizing a bunch of the Western Hemisphere. Right. And established the global American empire from that one false flag claim. By the way, still zero evidence that Spain did bomb the Maine. But even if it had, right, it's still sort of a false flag, because who cares? Why is there an American warship in Cuba in the first place? Why do we need to have that there? Why do we need to compete against other empires? Especially ones that are falling apart on their own, like the Spanish Empire. So yeah, man, just America. This is all I care about. I mean, really look at a map. Look at a map. Read some history. Learn about the history of American involvement in these countries. find out that, like in Russia, for instance, there's been an ongoing campaign funded probably at this point to the tune of billions of dollars over the last 30 years to overthrow the regime, the government of Vladimir Putin. So media outlets that are anti-Putin, activist organizations throughout Russia, anti-Putin, public intellectuals who are anti-Putin throughout Russia, all of them funded and coordinated by and directed by the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Endowment for Democracy, and USAID. And those are the people who largely Putin has put in prison, which he must do if he's the head of state of any sovereign nation. So, yeah.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I think Trump had to get rid of USAID if he wanted to negotiate with Putin at all, or, or it might be the single most stabilizing act that any president has ever done.
Well, now that you say that, yeah. I wonder, you're the first person who's even put this in my head, but it's a real possibility now. I wonder if Putin insisted that be part of the deal with Ukraine, that Trump take down USAID.
Well,
first, yeah. Which, as is basically the Doge's first takedown which was a sort of an interesting choice because there were so many things you could do, right? Mm-hmm. As Doge, there's so many agencies where there's waste, fraud, and abuse, and blah blah blah. Anyone would agree, but they chose USAID. And again, this is not a Russiagate bullshit conspiracy theory. No, it's just that I think Trump really wants to end this fucking war. And on this, I'm completely with him. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin said, because again, remember Putin's position right now. Militarily dominant. He's won the war, and there's no doubting it. And the Trump administration has completely acknowledged this too. So he's in the catbird seat. And so I would be not surprised at all if he said in the very first conversation that he had with Trump, hey, I'll come to a deal with Zelensky if part of the deal is you dismantle USAID. So no NATO for Ukraine and no USAID ever meddling in our country's affairs ever again. Which again, like if you just, how could you defend? But they do, these neocons, and they defend USAID, they defend intrusions into Russian civil life, political life that we would never tolerate. And we would go to war over. In fact, we have gone to war over such things. When the Soviet Union sent saboteurs and spies into the United States in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the Rosenbergs were the most famous example. That's all. But there were many. We now know there were thousands of people actually working directly for the Soviet Union to overthrow the US government. And what did we do to them? We electrocuted a bunch of them.
Well, yeah.
We put a lot of them in prison. Well, that's what Putin has done. That's what Putin has done to people who have been working for MI6, who have been working for the CIA through the USAID. Yeah, those are the people he's put in prison. Show me evidence that these were just innocent, freedom-loving Democrats, small d, fighting for freedom of the Russian people, and that's why they got put in. No, show me that they weren't working with the United States or the United Kingdom to overthrow the government of Russia. I've been looking, I've been trying to find evidence of that. I haven't found it, of people being put in prison who are not working with the West to overthrow the government of Russia. So until you can show me one single person like that, I'm going to disbelieve everything you have to say about Vladimir Putin and his evil intentions to conquer the world, just like Hitler, apparently.
Well,
right.
You do know how this is being spun by libs, like the mainstream narrative about USAID that you hear most often from libs is that Elon Musk did this out of cruelty, is that Elon Musk has a cruel heart and he wants to murder people who are dying of AIDS and tuberculosis in other countries. And he looked at everything in the US government and said, you know what? People dying of tuberculosis, we shouldn't help them anymore. That was the agenda. And that's the geopolitical analysis that is the mainstream. That's the mainstream narrative critique of what's happening right now. But what you were saying about Putin, I don't think he needed to make it a formal demand. I think it was just good statescraft on Trump's part, at least. But it's part of his, if it wasn't demand, it would be under his initial demand for denazification of Ukraine. Because if you stop funding the Nazis, that's the first step, right? If you stop funding the violent Nazi opposition, that's a good step. That's one of his first demands, period. And to get rid of the whole organization like that is a very clear step in that direction.
Indeed. Yeah, so I think we should move on.
Yeah.
I sort of did to Signalgate.
Yeah.
My favorite app.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm glad that we have like a story. Like, this is a fun story. Like, as a news show, it's nice to have a story to revolve around and not like a bunch of little things that might get attention. It's nice to have something actually happening, or at least something people are paying attention to.
Yeah.
So I want to frame this by saying, notice how the story is all about Jeffrey Goldberg's ego and how it's all about national security. It's all about the leak that happened, the fact that there was this huge security leak, and that a journalist was added to a group chat, and it's amateur hour, and this is what Hillary Clinton was almost thrown in jail for, the double standard, all that. But the story isn't actually about the Houthis being bombed in Yemen. Like, Jeffrey Goldberg totally supports the bombing of Houthis in Yemen. All these liberal journalists totally support this project, but their only criticism is that they didn't use the proper secure channels when discussing plans to bomb Houthis in Yemen.
Yep.
That's the first thing that needs to be said, I think, is that that's the story we're being told. It's not, it's not that we're reigniting a war that's a decade old. It's not
the poor Yemeni children.
Yeah. It's
not none of that.
Dozens of people killed by the strikes. It's
none of that.
A procedural, somebody got added to a group chat.
Okay, so listen. Okay, that's all well and good. Fine geopolitical analysis, Michael Weimer, but everyone knows that the main thing everyone needs to know about this story is that Jeffrey Goldberg and I were born in the same year. So I just go, if you haven't seen him, just go Google, look at some videos or pictures of Jeffrey Goldberg recently. And this is not an expression of vanity on my part. What I'm telling you, this is like a life coaching advice moment.
Physiognomy, as the boys would say.
No, we're both Jewish technically. He's more Jewish than I am, but I got some Jew in me.
Well, no. It's the lasting effects of being a warmonger.
Thank you. Always so smart. You're always so smart. So no, really, so we were born in the same year. So you can, if you choose to be a supporter of the Iraq War, the Libya bombing, Bosnia, every war in our lifetime, Jeffrey and mine, our lifetimes, if you have chosen, or if you choose to support every war in your lifetime, you can end up looking like Jeffrey Goldberg. And if you oppose those wars, I'm just saying. So anyway, it's healthy. Peace is healthy, is my point. Anti-imperialism is healthy. Mark Twain lived to how old? It's obvious that think about it. If you support war, you're more likely to die young, aren't you? Doesn't it reduce your life expectancy, sort of by definition? Okay. Here's the thing about Signalgate. I think, there's a lot of things about Signalgate. So number one, here's what everyone should know about Signalgate. In my opinion, number one, and this might be the most important thing, and it has been talked about a bit by some of the commentators, but not nearly enough. In terms of what, like, political salience, like what's going to change things in the world in the next few years, the most important fact from this episode is that we now know, and this is exciting, J.D. Vance and Joe Kent, who is Tulsi's number 2. Tulsi deputized him to be a part of this conversation. And if you know anything about Joe Kent's campaign for Congress or Senate, I forget, from Washington State, this guy is as anti-war, at least he was, as anybody I've ever heard of. We now know that J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, and the Deputy Director of National Intelligence are both pretty anti-intervention. They didn't want to do this. They did not want to do this. They went along with it. They went to, just like Tulsi did, who's talked really good game in the past about Yemen being a victim of Saudi and US aggression, and now she's all about it. Now she's supporting the United States bombing these poor people once again. But again, for the first time in US history, guys, we have a significant faction within the cabinet, the president's cabinet, who are at least hesitant about regime change, imperialist wars, elective wars, defending Israel at all costs, because you know what Netanyahu and the Netanyahu government wanted in this regard: to not support bombing the Houthis is anti-Semitic. They would say, right? Well, J.D. Vance was like, right at the last minute, we see this in the texts. In Signal, we see this. He's saying, wait a minute, guys, we don't want to do this. This is not a good idea. I'm against this. Then it happens. He's on vacation, apparently. They pull the trigger, and then he says, oh, great work. Yay, American flag, thumbs up, fist bump. But no, that guy's instinct, that guy's orientation is against such things. And then we got Joe Kent, who's working with Tulsi Gabbard, who's had a very mixed history on this question. But, at times she has been anti-intervention. Right now she's pro-intervention. But again, she's not solid in any way. And Joe Kent is, let me tell you, the neocons are freaking out that he's in the administration at all. Joe Kent gave the most amazing anti-war speeches I've ever heard in my life in 2020. Go look at Joe Kent's speeches for Congress or Senate. I forget. Out of Washington State, he was running for Congress or Senate in 2020. Go look at any of his speeches about war, and most of his speeches were about war. And he's an actual veteran, and his wife was killed, I think, in Iraq or Afghanistan. She was also a soldier. He's the deputy to Tulsi Gabbard. I'm telling you, he's given the most amazing anti-war speeches I've ever heard by an American politician, including Ron Paul, including Eugene Debs, including George McGovern. No, this guy, he is fierce, but then he's in there in this he's in the, top 15 people in the world who are making decisions about whether to go to war with Yemen. And so the chaotic nature of Trump, and there's no question that's what's in large part going on, what the establishment people would call the incompetency of the Trump administration, which I suppose is true. I guess this is a good example of that. It's all true, and God bless it. God bless their incompetency. God bless Mike Waltz, for whatever reason, putting Jeffrey Goldberg in the Signal chat.
Yeah.
Because now we know, again, the most transparent administration by far. I mean, it's not even close in American history.
That's what I was going to say.
And some of it's deliberate. Some of it's been deliberate and conscious, and that's been amazing, and a huge credit to Trump for that. And some of it's been inadvertent, like this, and a result of incompetence, which, sorry for them, but it's also fantastic. So we just have the U.S. government has never been this transparent. Trust me. I mean, I've been around for 6 decades now. Following politics. I've never known anywhere near this much about a U.S. federal government as now. I mean, it's not even close. The transparency, either through deliberate revelations or incompetent leaks like this, either way, whatever, I'm so glad for it. And American politics, I think, will be forever changed. And I do think, Michael, I think that you can't have an empire that's transparent.
Yeah.
You can't have an empire that's transparent. I think this might be the end for sure.
Uh-huh.
The beginning of the end, because now MAGA people are going to find out about Israel. Now MAGA people are going to find out all about what's really been going on in Ukraine, which they've already sort of started finding out anyway. They're going to start questioning the whole idea. They're going to look at the map. They're going to be, wait, we have bases in all these countries? What? Why do we have bases in Africa and Asia and all across Europe? Why? And we're going to start pulling them back. We're going to close those bases, bring those troops home, establish the most incredible national civil defense ever. Imagine if we brought the whole U.S. military back inside the United States. No one could ever fuck with us. We got both oceans and that military all here. Zero chance of us ever being attacked. And why don't we pursue that as a strategy? That's a strategy that anarchists, and I speak as one who is basically an anarchist, could get behind. The most radical people of the left and the right could get behind that strategy of bringing the U.S. military back home and establishing it as a purely but indomitably defensive military. Who's opposed to that? I'm all for that. So anyway, I've been pontificating a lot. You go ahead, man.
There's the 4D chess aspect of it that Rod in the chat was waiting for us to explain. Tim Pool has a 4D chess theory that this was guerrilla marketing, that the administration knew that they never get a fair shake in the media, so they just leaked the whole chat. And so now the American people can transparently see, or at least they could see the narrative, oh, we didn't want to do this, but we had to. And so that they could get their message out. I don't think it was deliberate like that. I do think Mike Waltz probably was incompetent. Mike Waltz, even if you're not a boomer, if you are a neocon, you just spiritually become a boomer and you become bad with technology. And I think Mike Waltz is in that camp. There's probably somebody else in the administration with the initials JG that he wanted to add to the chat. And he had Jeffrey Goldberg's contact, because guess what? Mike Waltz agrees with Jeffrey Goldberg on everything except for Trump's personal character, right? Mike Waltz they're both neocons.
Oh my God, Michael.
You okay?
No, I'm not okay. You called Mike Waltz a boomer. Yeah.
So, but beyond that,
another thing. He's 8 years younger than me. Okay, and I'm not a boomer.
He's a spiritual boomer. I said, even if you're not I was very careful. Even if you're not literally a boomer, becoming a neocon makes you spiritually a boomer. It's like you were saying with physiognomy. But
so wait, is this what makes you black? Is that the algebra that makes you black? I'm trying.
No,
me black or who's okay? Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Age, not race.
Gotcha.
Yeah. How things wear on you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how things cloud your mind. We've been talking about Thomas Aquinas, but there's a Thomistic explanation for this, that sin makes you stupid, that sin has all these negative effects on you, which you can see here. But beyond that, notice what the media is saying. This was a horrible.
I thought it was the tree of knowledge.
The tree of knowledge. I mean, the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
You eat the fruit and you learn things. No.
Well,
that's actually intellectuals.
That's what the devil said. That's what the serpent said, and he was lying. And
hence the 2,000-year war against intellectuals.
Yeah.
And I mean that. But continue.
Okay. It's hard to find a deeper intellectual spirit than Thomas Aquinas. Period. Like,
besides me.
Well, I mean, I just started looking into this, and volume 1 of the Summa is 52 hours. It's the most dense thing ever written. Like,
so the longer the book, the smarter it is. Huh?
I mean,
it's about it's this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's kind of like when people go to Applebee's, they're like, oh, the more food they give us, the better the food is.
Well,
quantity over quality, it's that kind of thing.
It's like chess. How many moves can you think ahead?
Look at this gigantic plate with heaps of food all over it, like just massive amounts of. It must be really good food. And so, if the book is 5,000 pages, it must be the smartest book ever.
Well, I mean, it's the midwit meme. It's the bell curve meme where absolute idiots who just believe what their grandmother told them when they were growing up. They're absolutely right. And Thomas Aquinas, who wrote 3 volumes that are hundreds of hours to read, is also correct.
Anyway, sorry, you were saying something more important about Aquinas.
Yeah. Notice what the media is saying about this. This was a horrible lapse of judgment. This was criminal. People need to be fired for it. Who needs to be fired for it? Pete Hegseth, the outsider reformer of the military who opposes the Ukraine war, needs to be fired for it. Not Mike Waltz, who is actually responsible for it and who the media agrees with on everything. So I think this is, as from a 4D chess perspective, this is a great opportunity for the Trump administration to take some accountability and fire Mike Waltz and then get somebody anti-war in his place. You've got a perfect excuse, a perfect scandal. You've got somebody opposing your anti-war mission. This is your chance, MAGA. Fire Mike Waltz, get rid of the neocons, take accountability, and save the world.
Your instincts are so amazing. They are. They're just so amazing. So turns out that Mike Waltz and Jeffrey Goldberg have had a relationship. Now, Waltz is now currently denying that.
Yeah.
And also saying the worst possible things he can about Jeffrey Goldberg, which you would want to do if you had a prior relationship with Jeffrey Goldberg and might have deliberately included him in this text chain to subvert Trump's foreign policy, because maybe Mike Waltz, and we now know this, had a prior relationship with Jeffrey Goldberg and people like Jeffrey Goldberg who were critics of, hostile to, skeptics of American Trump foreign policy. Mike Waltz, this is an old problem with Trump, right? This is the original problem for Trump, is that he's had a very difficult time finding people who are truly loyal to his ideology and to him.
Him personally, yeah.
And right, so I think Waltz has been loyal to him personally, and that's probably how he fooled Trump and got him to make Waltz the NSA, National Security Advisor. But there's some evidence, I'm just saying, you guys can look it up. There's evidence of Waltz being critical of Trump's foreign policy agenda.
Yeah.
And developing relationships with people like Jeffrey Goldberg, who's a neocon. This is, for those who don't know, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor of The Atlantic, he was one of the top 3 cheerleaders for the neocon Iraq war in 2003, has been for every war in America ever. Yes, he was born in the year I was, and you should look at him and just decide what course you want to take in life. He dropped out of college in the 1980s. He dropped out of college to go serve in the IDF, and he ended up serving as a prison guard in an Israeli prison for Palestinian detainees, where they conducted torture and all sorts of stuff. So he's that kind of guy, like ultra-Zionist, ultra-American imperialist, neocon, hawk, and Trump hates him. And we know this, right? Trump called him, what do you call him? Disgusting scumbag or something.
Yeah.
Didn't hold back.
Well, Jeffrey Goldberg was one of the first Russiagate guys. He was, I think in 2016, there's like Vladimir Putin's on the ballot. One of the first guys to say that, yeah.
So I was thinking this today, like if anybody supported both the Iraq war and Russiagate, They should not ever be listened to. Am I wrong? Like, if you were wrong on both of those things and really wrong, like you were a cheerleader for the Iraq War and a cheerleader for Russiagate, how on earth should anyone listen to you now? That's Jeffrey Goldberg. That's a lot of these people. It's just stunning that they have any credibility whatsoever. And I could, right off the top of my head, list 20 to 30 people, many of whom are friends of mine, who have taken those positions, who were pro-Iraq War, pro-Russiagate, and funny enough, they're also always supportive of Israel. They're pro-Gaza campaign, right? They're against the ceasefire. Imagine having that on your resume politically and being taken seriously as a political analyst. We should listen to this guy. He called for a war with Iraq in 2003, and he calls for genocide in Gaza now, and he thought that Putin had taken over America in 2016. I mean, they talked that way, by the way. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just collusion between Trump and Putin. No, the whole argument by the liberal class, professors said this, and journalists said this, and Jeffrey Goldberg said this, was that Vladimir Putin had taken over America. Look it up. Look at the discourse from Rachel Maddow and MSNBC and the New York Times in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. That's what they were really saying. It wasn't just that Trump had colluded with Putin. It was that Putin and Russia had taken over America. There was a huge article in the New York Times, I'll never forget this, during that time, saying that Putin had seized control of the National Rifle Association. I mean, because why was the evidence? Because two people of Russian nationality had joined the NRA in 2018. This is some lunacy, man. So those are the people who now still are considered to be the adults in the room. Right? Listen to Sam Harris, right? And listen to him talk about who the adults in the room are about foreign policy. And he'll mention the most ridiculous fanatical war hawks there are, like Timothy Snyder and Ann Applebaum. And he'll talk about Russiagate, and Sam Harris was one of the major purveyors of Russiagate. And he doesn't apologize for it now. In fact, I think he still sort of claims that I guess it was real in some ways. The thing that took us to the brink of World War III, which Trump, to his great credit, is now unraveling. Thank God. It's just amazing how many people are running around out there. David Frum, who supported Russiagate, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Libya War, COVID, all the COVID restrictions. By the way, interesting, Bill Kristol supported all that stuff and all the COVID restrictions, all the lockdowns. Interesting. Look at the people, identify the people who supported all of those things. All of those things. Russiagate, the Iraq War, the Gaza genocide, and the COVID lockdowns. That, you will find, is the foreign policy establishment of the United States of America. The people who have made the major decisions until 2 months ago about how the United States operates in the world. This is, and liberals and conservatives, by the way, made up of liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, that thing, sometimes called the blob, has been discredited over and over and over and over again. I mean, empirically shown again and again and again and again to have been mendacious, dishonest, completely false in their claims about what's going on in the rest of the world. And yet still, we are expected to believe and listen to them on matters of this importance. Oh, really? I see. So Putin is like Saddam. Okay. oh, he has weapons of mass destruction. He's going to kill everybody in Europe and then kill us. And so therefore we need to go to war with him by any means necessary, even through a proxy war in Ukraine. They'll kill 500,000 people and gain nothing in terms of territory or power. But we got to do that because it killed a bunch of Russians too. And I said this, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, like I've seen so many, again, friends of mine, acquaintances of mine, lots and lots of people I know, literally celebrating the Ukraine war and claiming it as a victory for Ukraine and the United States simply for one reason only, which is that tens of thousands of Russians have been killed. And I've seen the same people say the same thing about the Gaza war, that Israel has won this war. And the reason is that lots and lots of Hamas fighters have been killed. They measure victory entirely by that metric of death. They want to kill Russians and they want to kill Arabs. They want to reduce the numbers of Russians and the numbers of Arabs because they believe those two groups of people to be the intractable, eternal enemies of their world. I don't know. It's the most psychotic thing. But the thing is, much of the foreign policy establishment is inhabited by people who think that way. I have never once in my life felt threatened by Muslims or Islam or Russia or Vladimir Putin. Not even slightly. I've never had one reason to. I still don't. I never have. These people actually walk around and talk around as if they're imminent threats existentially to us, like Sharia law is going to be imposed in Kansas City and Putin is going to make us all speak Russian and he's going to take over the Congress and the presidency and the National Rifle Association and then invade all of Europe and conquer Great Britain and invade London and make France Russian speaking. And it's the most psychotic fantasy I've ever heard spelled out by political leaders of such stature. Michael Weimer.
Yeah.
Bring us back.
Well, I think to wrap this up, it's very possible that Mike Waltz was being subversive and was intentionally leaking information to Jeffrey Goldberg.
Yeah.
And that Jeffrey Goldberg overplayed his hand and didn't get the hints. And didn't get the hint that Mike Waltz was tipping him in on who's who in the administration, what they believe, and how things are run. And yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg just, like, I don't know, some like schoolboy just started tattletaling and putting himself at the center of the story. It's very possible that that's what happened. Or Mike Waltz is just a boomer who was trying to include somebody else in the administration with JG.
He's
and his initials.
He's 51. He was born in the 70s. Okay, so Jesus, the boomer. See, the boomer.
Confounded thing. How do you work this thing?
All right, you win. You fucking win. Move on.
Yeah.
I'm an old Gen Xer.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Walls is like a mid Gen Xer. He was born in the 70s, for God's sake.
Again,
he was at a work on webcam.
Spiritual boomer. Beyond that.
Hey, listen, first of all, who invented the internet? Gen X. Not you fuckers. Well, okay. Excuse me? No, Gen X invented the... No, we know he didn't, but we do know Gen X invented the internet. Mm-hmm. Hello. People who were born after 1960 invented the internet. That's not a controversial statement. So don't ever include us in the boomer category, okay? Even if my webcam slips occasionally. It's just for me getting excited. I hit the table and the webcam jostles, that's all.
It's the pounding and the shouting.
Right. Gen X, we're passionate people.
Passionate,
Gen Xers.
Yeah.
We are. We care about things. You were saying.
So yeah, either way, whatever the explanation is, he should be fired. And
right,
you have the perfect out for it right now. And
right.
if you're a MAGA person or if you're a liberal who hates MAGA, you want Mike Waltz fired anyways. So
Right.
all pressure right now should be applied to firing Mike Waltz. And it's
Well, I mean, I don't want him fired. I want him to continue to be NSA. As I said on Twitter today, I want more government officials to use Signal.
Mhm.
No, don't we want Mike Waltz to be central in American foreign policy planning and to continue to use Signal for all communications? The most transparent administration in American history.
It's the most transparent administration in American history, yes.
Has there been, listen, everybody, I'm thinking here, an American historian here. Has there ever been a more transparent moment in American political history than now? Has there ever been an American administration more transparent than this one? No, not even close. We know, what has it been? How long have they been? 2 months now? 2 months. They've been in power now for 2 months. We know more about these fucking people and about how they think and about how they talk to each other and what they eat for lunch by far than anybody else ever in American history. And that is a wonderful thing for what we call democracy. Is this not the most democratic moment ever? And I thought we liked democracy. I thought we loved democracy. Transparency in government is the most democratic thing one could want. This is the most democratic moment. Now, again, half of it's inadvertent by Trump and his people based on incompetency. Yes, but nonetheless, for whatever reason, we now see through government more clearly than we ever have. And that's just a fantastic thing.
As I've been refusing to criticize the Trump administration for the first 6 to 18 months, I think it's been in the context of not having the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it's always about comparing, choices, our limited choices that we have. And how was this administration different, especially in terms of transparency, to the Biden administration, where we didn't even know who was president? Like, it was the most locked down press room you could find, the most hostile press room you could find. And there were speculations that Joe was a robot, that he was AI generated, all of which were entirely possible, that there were, the least transparent administration, obviously. There was an article from July saying, there's articles in May, June, and July talking about how great Biden is, how sharp he is, how he's still the candidate, how he can still win this thing. But let's talk about, you want to talk about that new book? You put that in the document. You want to talk about Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance?
Yes, I do. But let me say one last thing. And this is like a warning, I guess, to Trump people and MAGA people generally, who I have been quite sympathetic to for 10 years now. And you can look at my Twitter. You can see my record on this. I have supported the J6ers since the very beginning. I have been sympathetic to Trump. I've had many, many MAGA people on my show. So that's where I'm coming from. And I still am sympathetic. And I still think Steve Bannon is one of the greatest political intellectuals of my lifetime. I have disagreements, but I have massive, huge respect and admiration and gratitude, actually, to MAGA for disrupting the two-party duopoly that dominated American politics through my lifetime. They completely changed everything. Some of it's scary, but they've done what I've been asking for through my life, which is to break apart this system so that we can now think in new ways and think openly and think freely, and which is exactly what we're doing now. Some of the ideas we don't like, some of the ideas we do like, but that's what's happened because of MAGA entirely. And they deserve huge credit just for that, for breaking apart American politics as we knew it. Now, having said that, What I suggested there is that I value them as a revolutionary movement, which they are and always have been, as a revolutionary, external, outside, oppositional movement, immensely valuable, and have exposed all sorts of secrets of the American government. The Signal scandal recently is just the latest example of that, right? We know that one of the great things about Trump is he just talks, he tells us things he's not supposed to tell us about how the American government works, right? So just immense benefits, dismantling pieces of the American empire, USAID, NED, fantastic, for sure. Then there's been the grotesque violations of the Bill of Rights, like what he's done to the Venezuelans. We don't even know. And at least 2 or 3 of them are completely innocent, almost for sure, not members of a gang. One was a gay makeup artist, and one was a soccer player. And they are now in a worse than a dungeon in El Salvador. This is beyond hideous, and I God hope that we can get those guys out of there. But so mixed bag, but a lot of good for anybody who has any kind of interest in American I was going to say freedom. I mean, not so much for this poor Venezuelans, but generally I would say for the average American citizen, Trump has brought a measure of freedom that we have not experienced or enjoyed recently. So having said all that, listen, the worst thing that can happen to you as a revolutionary movement is for you to win. And look at history. Look at history. Damn near, I think, not damn near, I think every revolutionary movement, once it won, seized power, took control, attained sovereignty, has proceeded to enact measures to control the population, restrict the population, repress the population, limit the speech rights of the population, the civil rights of the population, because any regime that holds state power needs to do that, not because they're evil, but because any state power requires that. You have to maintain an orderly, civil, obedient, compliant population to maintain your power. And that's every state in every country, regardless of ideology, of all time. And so that's where Trump is headed. The MAGA movement is headed. They've achieved power. They've become institutionalized. This radical, disruptive, subversive, revolutionary movement, which it is, it's all those things, it has been all those things, now actually controls the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the CIA and the State Department. And you will see, I guarantee you, everybody, over the next 4 years, you will see them attempt things against America, and we're seeing this already, but attempt things against American people to limit our freedom over and over and over again, because they must maintain their own power, not because they're evil, but because every other state regime, they must maintain their power, which ultimately requires limiting speech, limiting expression, limiting political options. And we're already seeing that. So again, and there's number one, and number two is that especially with such a neophyte, chaotic, anarchic administration like this one, cobbled together at the last minute with people who disagree with each other on major issues, except for their love of Trump, you're going to see splits, divisions, schisms, scandals. The Signal thing, 8 weeks into this administration, we already have that kind of scandal. We're going to see, it's just what you want to do if you're a Trump supporter, a MAGA person, if you agree with the basic principles of this movement, continue that. Continue to support those principles, those values, for sure, but you need to distance yourself from Trump himself and the MAGA movement right now. because they are going to sink you in the ocean.
Oh, well,
guaranteed.
You think there's going to be a entrapment thing like January 6th again?
Oh, it's going to be. We got 4 more years of this, man. You think? What do you think the Trump administration is going to look like 4 years from now? They're going to be a complete. I mean, they're going to be besieged and subverted, and they're going to self-implode, and they're going to make mistake after mistake after mistake, and they're going to punish their own people. They're going to be hypocrites. They're going to contradict themselves as they've already done over and over and over again, and their base is going to get increasingly pissed off and fractured. I can basically guarantee this, given the history of revolutionary movements like this over the last 100 years, right? Every single one of them has ended up in a place they didn't want to be, which is why you need to never identify with any political cause, any political movement, any political person in particular, because they will end up fucking you. I am just warning you, MAGA people, have your principles. Don't change your values or your principles. Don't. But this guy, this movement, this government, you need to distance yourself from it now before it's too late.
I mean, I've been so humbled by the success of the Trump campaign, and that they've like actually taken us away from World War III. That they've actually provided an alternative to the blob, and they've won. And they've, for the first time, cut government spending, for the first time, cut defense spending, for the first time, had a concerted effort to roll back the war state and the deep state. First time any victories have ever happened on that front. I have been humbled that grandmas and J6ers and working class people and people who go to Kid Rock concerts and Hank Williams Jr. concerts and Ted Nugent concerts, who are dumb enough to get entrapped by the FBI on something like January 6th, are the ones who kept this movement alive and the ones that quite literally saved the whole world. And to tell them to stop now is to not concede that they were right and that they literally saved the world.
Wait, who saved the world?
Kid Rock and Hank Williams Jr. fans. People who saw Trumpism, saw the aesthetic movement that it was, found that this was an opportunity to fight back against the establishment. People who had nothing to lose and who went all in on it. And without that base, and yes, they were victims of the January 6th entrapment and the Fedsurrection. And yes, they got fired and demonized, and their towns were destroyed by color revolutions that were Black Lives Matter. Yes, they've been demonized and everything, but they've won up to this point. They've taken us away from World War III with the Ukraine war, and they've provided the only actual alternative to endless communism that the Democratic Party was promising us. And you've got to say, you were right, guys. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for not being afraid to look uncool. Thank you for wearing your heart on your sleeve. And thank you for supporting this movement that got you ostracized from polite society. Thank you. They did it. And the people who voted for him 3 times, or 6 times even, in primaries, they're smarter than us. Or they're better than us, honestly.
Yes.
It's so easy to be an armchair quarterback and have nothing invested in this. But they actually put their lives on the line and they suffered for it, and they should have nothing but our thanks for it.
I just want to say that was the most racist screed I've ever heard. I mean, the hatred for African Americans that you just expressed is breathtaking. That was amazing. Oh my God, Michael Weimer. That was amazing. No, I mean, it's amazing. It's not the end of the discussion. I mean, but yes, I think you're right. So I do think that historians, when they look back on this era, 100 years, 200 years from now, I think it's likely that you're right, that they will look back and identify the MAGA movement as the origin of the breakdown of the American empire and the ending of these ridiculous imperial wars that we've been suffering under for about 200 years now. I think the world is going to divide into 2 or 3 spheres of influence, one controlled by Russia, one controlled by China, one controlled by the US and the West and Western Europe. And I'm hoping that's going to be a more peaceful Pacific era. But yeah, whatever the case, I think you're right. The nationalist populists in this country, and especially and also in Western Europe, brought about that era. You're right. It was this movement of nationalists, populists, patriots, national sovereigntists, I've heard them called, right? Maybe even xenophobes, maybe even racists, maybe even, anti-imperialists. Those are all consistent, for better or worse. But yes, this crazy ragtag coalition of people who don't want to live in a global empire. We, but especially, you're right, MAGA are the ones who have brought it down. And I think historically, probably, when we rewrite the narrative of the 21st century, they will be identified as such, and hopefully heroically. We'll see. But dude, brilliant. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
And if you flash back to 2015, people like us, myself included, probably wanted Bernie to be that guy, and it just didn't pan out like that.
Exactly.
And
look what Bernie's saying now, right?
Yeah.
Look what he's saying now. We found out, and the whole dirtbag left is against Bernie now.
Yeah.
Because they're like, wait, what? You said what about Russia? You said what about Israel? You said what about drones? You said what about Yemen? They found out that Bernie's part of the machine. Not necessarily the Zionist machine, although that's a piece of it, but he's just a part of the global US imperialist machine. Meaning he has assumed that to be the norm, that the United States should have military bases and aircraft carriers and hundreds of thousands of soldiers all over the world all the time. Kind of an amazing presumption, right? Are we fucking Julius Caesar? I guess we are. We think it's just natural and correct and right for there to be hundreds of thousands of American soldiers and tanks and aircraft carriers and fighter jets and fighter bombers and Air Force bases all over the world all the time. It is the craziest religion I've ever heard of. But yeah, Bernie Sanders is part of that. And MAGA, in particular, has been against that. Has been against Steve Bannon.
All practicality,
Correct.
In the real world, in real world, getting things done, seizing power and exercising it. That's what happened.
Correct.
We didn't have time to talk about anything else, but
wait. The thing is, the question is like, did you come to that realization, that analysis, because you're racist or because of something else?
Again, it always comes to name calling. They have no arguments, so all they do is call you names. But
did you not appreciate the check that I forwarded you from the Russian government last month?
The Russian government, yeah.
The GRU? Mm-hmm. Well, that wasn't enough for you? The headphones aren't nice? You don't like those headphones that we got for you?
I was about to point out that what is it? Rashida Tlaib's district, right?
Dearborn.
Dearborn,
Detroit.
Michigan.
Detroit.
Went plus 32 for Rashida Tlaib and plus 7 for Trump. Like this coalition, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
And his movement, yeah. I mean, but I want to talk about.
Let's do. Yeah, go ahead. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
You brought up this book, Abundance.
Yes.
By Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson.
Yes.
And I think the broader point is the state of the Democratic Party and their urgent need to rebrand. And this book is an attempt to bring it back to middle class issues and the affordability crisis that middle class people are facing, and respond to criticism that Democrat-run cities are too expensive to live in, and propose a new vision of policy to bring in a broader voting coalition. I want to put this also in the context of there's a lot of there's some Gen Z candidates coming up for the midterms that are looking to primary some establishment Democrats who have been long unopposed. And they're running on the actual left policy, anti-interventionist as much as you can be, at least with Israel, and more socialist, more socialist Medicare for all type things, the things that Democrats have always wanted, but this is happening, and so the establishment needs to. They're in deep trouble. Are you swayed by the new arguments? I want to say that they're more libertarian. I think that's also another. Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein are making more libertarian arguments in their book to try to win over the center, or try to win over people who voted for Trump for purely economic reasons. I think that's a sign of Reason Magazine, Open Borders types who have been political establishment types, always being somewhat pro-free markets and moving to the Democratic Party out of opposition to Trump.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I've lived my entire life in 3 different places: San Francisco, New York City, and Los Angeles. And at the beginning of my life in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, those were wonderful places that I recommended all the time. Anytime I saw anybody I knew, I would say, you need to live in one of these 3 places if you want to do anything interesting with your life. That was absolutely true. They're just, God, glorious places. Even massive problems. There was certainly crime and infrastructural issues, certainly in the 70s and 80s and 90s in those cities, but they were still clearly the best places to live in the United States and possibly in the whole world, but certainly in the United States. And since then, as we all know, they've become damn near Mad Max level dystopian hellscapes. So I've said this before, in the Bay Area, I think we now have 50,000 homeless people living in the central city areas of Oakland and San Francisco. 50,000. And if you've been here for any amount of time, you know what I'm talking about. There are entire mile-wide encampments of homeless people in both those cities, and Oakland too. The roads are torn up all over the state. Anybody who's been in Los Angeles recently, drive anywhere in central Los Angeles and tell me the roads are better than Baghdad. They're not. They're better. They're worse than Baghdad because the provisional government in Baghdad after 2003 made sure to invest in infrastructure and fix the roads in Baghdad. When I was in Mexico recently, I was shocked at how good the roads were compared to the roads in Oakland and San Francisco and Marin County and Sunnyvale. So yeah, I think we need to take a very close look at domestic politics through that lens.
Yeah, it's the effort that Derek and Ezra are trying to make is to win over, people who have your complaints and bring them back to the Democratic Party. But they need a winning test case first. They need a city that actually implements their newfound policies before they have a national candidate like Gavin Newsom, who is going to adopt whatever they say that will convince people. Like, you need this to work out somewhere first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The main thing is housing. I think this is right. I think the primary issue in this realm is housing. I think we all agree on that. And so what's great about Klein and Thompson on this is that they agree, I believe, that housing policies in the major cities in America have been dominated by Democrats who have been basically NIMBYs, which is that they've allowed neighborhoods in San Francisco, New York, LA, etc., Seattle, Portland, Boston, to establish restrictive zoning ordinances that have basically made it impossible to erect multi-story, multi-family, low-income housing, cheap housing, right? If you go to like almost any other city in the world, they have giant towers, apartment towers, right? They have vertical development of housing, which has made those cities livable. You can be a working class person and live in those cities like you could in New York City and San Francisco in the 1990s when I was coming up. When I was a young man, I and many of my friends lived in San Francisco, and I mean like in the central San Francisco, and then New York City, central Manhattan. And we were anarchists and peace activists and weirdo, freaks and losers. We could still live in those cities. Yeah.
You know who might actually implement this and might get some popular momentum from it is Eric Adams.
Can I get someone who's intelligent to do this?
You're not going to get that from a Democratic politician, but
true. True.
But
so racist.
He's in a position where he has nothing to lose and everything to gain. And he might actually, go against the rent control standard that has been the standard of the Democratic Party. But Eric Adams has been on Tucker, and he's been aligning with Trump, and he's been getting some more popular support after his own party took him out for some weird corruption charges. So don't sleep on Eric Adams. And
all right.
Yeah, and Gavin Newsom is going to be in the spotlight, and he's probably going to try to use ideas in this book to advertise himself as a forward thinker. And you just have to point at California. Never, as Gavin Newsom pushes himself to the spotlight, just ask him, how are you the first governor of California to where the population goes down, to where people are fleeing California?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
perfect, man. Yes, sir. Progressivism is imploding, and it's going to implode on top of Gavin Newsom's head, which will be quite gratifying for me. But listen, we got to wrap up right now. Can you post the?
Yeah.
Because people have been begging me for this address. So I know everybody. I've been getting just so many emails about this, how to join up, how to support us. I've been besieged the last week. It's been really kind of a lot. But so please go to patreon.com if you want to do this. If you want to join the masses of people who want to help us, go to patreon.com/unregistered and just join up as a patron at any level, super cheap. And part of that deal at any level is you get to join us at the after show. After every Unreported, Michael and I hang out on Zoom with our patrons, and we have an amazing time. It's the highlight of my week. And we're going to go there right now. So go to patreon.com/unregistered, become a patron. Support this show. And Michael, I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll see you at the show.
Yeah. See you at the show. And unregisteredacademy.com, session 2 of the Israel-Palestine history is next Tuesday. So
exactly.
Another thing to look forward to.
Totally.
All right.
See
We're
you
out.
soon. Bye.
Shalom.